Skipping Christmas by John Grisham. Day 4. Chapter 9. Stanley Wiley's father had founded Wiley and Beck in 1949. Beck had been dead so long now, no one knew exactly why his name was still on the door. Had a nice ring to it, Wiley and Beck, and two, it would be expensive to change the stationery and such. For an accounting firm that had been around for half a century, the amazing thing was how little it had grown. There were a dozen partners in tax, including Luther, and 20 or so in auditing. Their clients were mid-range companies that couldn't afford the national accounting firms. If Stanley Wiley had more ambition, some 30 years earlier, the old firm might possibly have caught the wave and become a force. But he hadn't, and it didn't, and now it pretended to be content by calling itself a boutique firm. Just as Luther was planning another quick departure for another sprint to the mall, Stanley materialized from nowhere with a long sandwich lettuce hanging off the sides. "Got a minute?" he said with a mouthful. He was already sitting before Luther could say yes or no, or can it be quick. He wore silly bow ties and usually had a variety of stains on his blue button-downs: ink, mayonnaise, coffee. Stanley was a slob, his office a notorious landfill where documents and files were lost for months. "Try Stanley's office," was the firm's slogan for paperwork that would never be found. "I hear you're not going to be at the Christmas dinner tomorrow night," he said, still chewing. Stanley liked to roam the halls at lunch with a sandwich in one hand, a soda in the other, as if he were too busy for a real lunch. "I'm eliminating a lot of things this year, Stanley. No offense to anyone," Luther said. "So it's true. It's true. We will not be there." Stanley swallowed with a frown, then examined the sandwich in search of the next bite. He was the managing partner, not the boss. Luther had been a partner for 6 years. No one at Wiley and Beck could force him to do anything. "Sorry to hear that. Jane will be disappointed." "I'll drop her a note," Luther said. It wasn't a terrible evening. A nice dinner at an old restaurant downtown and a private room upstairs, good food, decent wines, a few speeches, then a band and dancing until late. Black tie, of course, and the ladies tried hard to one-up each other with dresses and jewelry. Jane Wiley was a delightful woman who deserved a lot more than she got with Stanley. "Any particular reason?" Stanley asked, prying just a little. "We're skipping the whole production this year, Stanley. No tree, no gifts, no hassle. Saving the money and taking a cruise for 10 days. Blair's been gone. We need a break. I figure we'll catch up rather nicely next year, or if not, the year after." It does come every year, doesn't it?" "It does indeed." "I see you're losing weight." 10 pounds. The beaches are waiting." "You look great, Luther." "Tanning, I hear." "Trying a darker shade, yes. I can't let the sun get the best of me." A huge bite of the ham on baguette with strands of lettuce trailing along and hanging between the lips. Then movement. "Not a bad idea, really," or something like that. Stanley's idea of a vacation was a week in his beach house, a hand-me-down in which he had invested nothing in 30 years. Luther and Nora had spent one dreadful week there, guests of the Wileys, who took the main bedroom and put the cranks in the guest suite, a narrow room with bunk beds and no air conditioning. Stanley knocked back gin and tonics from mid-morning until late afternoon, and the sun never touched his skin. He left, his cheeks full, but before Luther could escape, Yank Slater darted in. "Up to $5,200, old boy," he announced, with no end in sight. "Abigail just spent $600 on a dress for the Christmas dinner. Don't know why she couldn't wear the one from last year or the year before, but why argue? Shoes were $140, purse another $90. Closets full of purses and shoes, but don't get me started. We'll top $7 grand at this rate. Please let me go on the cruise." Please let me go on the cruise. Inspired by Luther, Yank was keeping a precise tally on the Christmas damage. Twice a week he dashed in for updates. What he would do with the results was uncertain. Most likely nothing, and he knew it. "You're my hero," he said again, and left as quickly as he had arrived. They're all envious, Luther thought to himself. At this moment, crunch time with only a week to go and the holiday madness growing each day. They're all jealous as heck. Some, like Stanley, were reluctant to admit it. Others, like Yank, were downright proud of Luther. Too late to tan. Luther walked to his window and enjoyed the view of a cold rain falling on the city. Gray skies, barren trees, a few leaves scattering with the wind. Traffic backed up on the streets in the distance. How lovely, he thought smugly. He patted his flat stomach, then went downstairs and had a diet soda with Biff, the travel agent. At the buzzer, Nora bolted from the bronze mat and grabbed the towel. Sweating was not something she had particularly enjoyed, and she wiped herself with vengeance. She was wearing a very small red bikini, one that had looked great on the young slinky model in the catalog, one she knew she'd never wear in the public, but Luther had insisted on anyway. He gawked at the model and threatened to order the thing himself. It wasn't too expensive, so Nora now owned it. She glanced in the mirror and again blushed at the sight of herself in such a skimpy garment. Sure, she was losing weight. Sure, she was getting a tan. But it would take 5 years of starvation and hard labor in the gym to do justice to what she was wearing at the moment. She dressed quickly, pulling her slacks and sweater on over the bikini. Luther swore he tanned in the nude, but she wasn't stripping for anyone. Even dressed, she still felt like a slut. The thing was tight in all the wrong places, and when she walked, well, it wasn't exactly comfortable. She couldn't wait to race home, take it off, throw it away, and enjoy a long hot bath. She'd made it safely out of Tans forever and rounded a corner when she came face to face with the Reverend Doug Zabriskie, their minister. He was laden with shopping bags, while she held nothing but her overcoat. He was pale, she was red-faced and still sweating. He was comfortable in his old tweed jacket, overcoat, collar, black shirt. Nora's bikini was cutting off her circulation and shrinking by the moment. They hugged politely. "Missed you last Sunday," he said, the same irritating habit he'd picked up years ago. "We're so busy," she said, checking for her forehead for sweat. "Are you okay, Nora?" "Fine," she snapped. "You look a little winded." "A lot of walking," she said, lying to her minister. For some reason, he glanced down at her shoes. She certainly wasn't wearing sneakers. "Could we chat for a moment?" he asked. "Well, sure," she said. There was an empty bench near the railing of the concourse. The Reverend lugged his bags over and piled them beside it. When Nora sat, Luther's little red bikini shifted again and somehow gave way, a strap perhaps just above her hip, and something was sliding down there. Her slacks were loose, not tight at all, and there was plenty of room for movement. "I've heard lots of rumors," he began softly. He had the annoying habit of getting close to your face when he spoke. Nora crossed and recrossed her legs, and with each maneuver made things worse. "What kind of rumors?" she asked stiffly. "Well, I'll be very honest, Nora," he said, leaning even lower and closer. "I hear it from a good source that you and Luther have decided not to observe Christmas this year." "Sort of, yes." "I've never heard of this," he said gravely, as if the cranks had discovered a new variety of sin. She was suddenly afraid to move, and even then got the impression that she was still falling out of her clothes. Fresh beads of sweat popped up along her forehead. "Are you okay, Nora?" he asked. "I'm fine, and we're fine. We still believe in Christmas and celebrating the birth of Christ. We're just passing on all the foolishness this year. Blair's gone, and we're taking a break." He pondered this long and hard while she shifted slightly. "It is a bit crazy, isn't it?" he said, looking at the pile of shopping bags as he deposited nearby. "Yes, it is. Look, we're fine, Doug, I promise. We're happy and healthy and just relaxing a bit, that's all. I hear you're leaving." "Yes, for 10 days on a cruise." He stroked his beard as though he wasn't sure if he approved of this or not. "You won't miss the midnight service, will you?" he asked with a smile. "No promises, Doug." He patted her knee and said goodbye. She waited until he was out of sight, then finally mustered the courage to get to her feet. She shuffled out of the mall, cursing Luther in his bikini. Vic Frohmeyer's wife's cousin's youngest daughter was active in her Catholic church, which had a large youth choir that enjoyed caroling around the city. A couple of phone calls and the gig was booked. A light snow was falling when the concert began. The choir formed a half moon in the driveway near the gas lamp, and on cue started bawling "O Little Town of Bethlehem." They waved at Luther when he peeked through the blinds. A crowd soon gathered behind the carolers, kids from the neighborhood and the Beckers from the next door, the Trogdon clan. There, by virtue of an anonymous tip, a reporter from the Gazette watched for a few minutes, then asserted himself and rang the crank's doorbell. Luther yanked the door open, ready to land a punch. "What is it?" White Christmas resounded in the background. "Are you Mr. Crank?" asked the reporter. "Yes, and who are you?" "Brian Brown with the Gazette. Can I ask you some questions?" "About what?" "About this skipping Christmas business." Luther gazed at the crowd in his driveway. One of those dark silhouettes out there had squealed on him. One of his neighbors had called the newspaper, either Frohmeyer or Walt Shield. "I'm not talking," he said, and slammed the door. Nora was in the shower again, and Luther went to the basement. Chapter 10. Luther suggested dinner at Angelo's, their favorite Italian place. It was on the ground floor in an old building downtown, far away from the hordes in the malls and shopping centers, 5 blocks from the parade route. It was a good night to be away from Hemlock. They ordered salad with a light dressing and pasta with tomato sauce. No meat, no wine, no bread. Nora had tanned for the 7th time, Luther for the 10th, and as they sipped their sparkling water, they admired their weathered looks and chuckled at all the pale faces around them. One of Luther's grandmothers had been half Italian, and his Mediterranean genes were proving quite conducive to tanning. He was several shades darker than Nora, and his friends were noticing. He couldn't have cared less. By now, everyone knew they were headed for the islands. "It's starting now," Nora said, looking at her watch. Luther looked at his. 7 p.m. The Christmas parade was launched every year from Veterans Park in Midtown. With floats and fire trucks and marching bands, it never changed. Santa always brought up the rear in a sleigh built by the Rotarians and escorted by 8 fat Shriners on mini-bikes. The parade looped through the west side and came close to Hemlock. Every year for the past 18, the Cranks and their neighbors had camped along the parade route and made an event out of it. It was a festive evening, one Luther and Nora wished to avoid this year. Hemlock would be wild with kids and carolers and who knew what else. Probably bicycle gangs chanting "Free Frosty" and little terrorists planting signs on their front lawn. "How was the firm's Christmas dinner?" Nora asked. "Sounded like the usual. Same room, same waiter, same tenderloin, same souffle." Slater said Stanley got drunk as a skunk during cocktails. "I've never seen him sober during cocktails." He made the same speech. "Great effort. Billings up. We'll knock 'em dead next year. Wiley and Beck, his family. Thanks to all." That sort of stuff. I'm glad we missed it. Anybody else skip it? Slater said Moppin from auditing was a no-show. I wonder what Jane wore. I'll ask Slater. I'm sure he took notes. Their salads arrived and they gawked at the baby spinach like famine refugees. But they slowly and properly applied the dressing, a little salt and pepper, and then began eating as if they were completely disinterested in food. The Island Princess served non-stop food. Luther planned to eat until he popped. At a table not far away, a pretty young lady with dark hair was eating with her date. Nora saw her and laid down her fork. "Do you think she's okay, Luther?" Luther glanced around the room and said, "Who?" "Blair." He finished chewing and pondered the question that she now asked only 3 times a day. "She's fine, Nora. She's having a great time." "Is she safe?" Another standard question posed as if Luther should know for certain whether their daughter was safe or not at that precise moment. "The Peace Corps hasn't lost a volunteer in 30 years. Yes, trust me, they're very careful, Nora. Now eat." She pushed her greens around, took a bite, lost interest. Luther wiped his plate clean and honed in on hers. "You gonna eat that?" he asked. She swapped plates, and in a flash, Luther had cleaned the second one. Pasta arrived, and she guarded her bowl. After a few measured bites, she stopped suddenly, her fork halfway to her face. Then she laid it down again and said, "I forgot." Luther was chewing with vengeance. "What is it?" Her face was stricken with terror. "What is it, Nora?" he repeated, swallowing hard. "Don't those judges come around after the parade?" Then it hit Luther, too. He retired his fork for a moment, sipped water, gazed painfully at nothing in the distance. Yes, indeed, it was true. After the parade, a committee from the Parks and Rec toured the neighborhoods on a float pulled by a John Deere tractor and examined the level of Christmas spirit. They gave individual awards in the various categories: original design, festive lighting, etc., and they handed out an award to the street with the best decorations. Hemlock had won the blue ribbon twice. The year before, Hemlock had placed second, primarily because, according to the gossip on the street, 2 of the 42 homes had not put up a Frosty. Boxwood Lane, 3 blocks north, had come from nowhere with a dazzling row of candy canes. Candy Cane Lane, it described itself, and took away Hemlock's award. Frohmeyer circulated memos for a month. Dinner, now ruined, came to a standstill as they picked through their pasta and killed as much time as possible. 2 long cups of decaf. When Angelo's was empty, Luther paid the bill and they drove home slowly. Sure enough, Hemlock lost again. Luther fetched the Gazette in the semi-darkness and was horrified with the front page of Metro. The award winners were listed: Cherry Avenue first, Boxwood Lane second, Stanton third, Trogdon across the street with more than 14,000 lights finished fourth in festive lighting. In the center of the page was a large color photo of the Crank home, taken at some distance. Luther studied it intently and tried to determine the angle. The photographer had shot down at a wide angle, sort of an aerial view. Next door, the Becker house positively glowed with a blinding display of lights. On the other side, the Kerr's house and lawn were perfectly lined with alternating reds and greens, thousands of them by now. The Crank home was dark. To the east, the Frohmeyers, Nugents, and Galdys could be seen, all glowing warmly, all with their Frosties sitting snugly on the roofs. To the west, the Dents, Sloans, and Bellingtons all radiated Christmas splendor. The Crank home was very dark. "Shield," Luther grumbled to himself. The photo was taken from directly across the street. Walt Shield had allowed the photographer to climb up onto the roof of his 2-story house and shoot down with a wide lens, probably had the whole street egging him on. Under the photo was a brief story headlined, "Skipping Christmas." It read, "The home of Mr. and Mrs. Luther Crank is rather dark this Christmas. While the rest of their neighbors on Hemlock Street are decorating and busily preparing for Santa, the Cranks are skipping Christmas and preparing for a cruise, according to unnamed sources. No tree, no lights, and no Frosty up on the roof. The only house on Hemlock to keep Frosty hidden in the basement. Hemlock, a frequent winner in the Gazette's street decoration contest, finished a disappointing 6th this year." "I hope they're satisfied now," complained one unidentified neighbor. "A rotten display of selfishness," said another. If Luther had a machine gun, he would have bolted outside and commenced spraying houses. Instead, he sat for a long time with a knot in his stomach and tried to convince himself that this too would pass. Just 4 days until they left, and when they came back, all those dang frosties would be stored away, the lights and trees would be gone, the bills would start flooding in, and perhaps then all his wonderful neighbors would be more sympathetic. He flipped through the newspaper, but his concentration was shot. Finally, Luther found his resolve, gritted his teeth, and took the bad news to his wife. "What a horrible way to wake up," Nora said as she tried to focus on the photo in the newspaper. She rubbed her eyes and squinted. "That jerk Shiel allowed the photographer to get on his roof," Luther said. "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. Look at the picture." She was trying, then she found her focus and read the story. She gasped at "rotten display of selfishness." "Who said that?" she demanded. "Either Shiel or Frohmeyer. Who knows? I'm in the shower." "How dare they?" Nora said, still gawking at the photo. "Atta girl," thought Luther. "Get mad. Stiffen your back. Just 4 days to go. We're not collapsing now." That night after dinner and an effort at television, Luther decided to take a walk. He bundled up and wrapped a wool scarf around his neck. It was below freezing outside with a chance of snow. He and Nora had bought one of the first homes on Hemlock. Danged if he'd be forced to hide inside. This was his street, his neighborhood, his friends. One day soon, this little episode would be forgotten. Luther ambled along, hands stuck deep in his pockets, cold air invigorating his lungs. He made it to the far end, to the intersection of Moss Point, before Spike Frohmeyer picked up his trail and caught him on a skateboard. "Hi, Mr. Crank," he said as he rolled to a stop. "Well, hello, Spike. What brings you out?" "Just taking a little walk. Enjoying the Christmas decorations?" "Of course. What brings you out?" "Just watching the street," Spike said, then looked around as if an invasion were imminent. "What's Santa gonna bring you?" Spike smiled and pondered for a second. "Not sure. Probably a Game Boy and a hockey stick and a set of drums." "Quite a haul. Of course, I don't really believe anymore, you know, but Mike's just 5, so we still pretend." "Sure. Gotta go. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas to you, Spike," Luther said, uttering the forbidden greeting for what he hoped was the first and last time of the season. Spike disappeared down Hemlock, no doubt racing home to report to his father Mr. Crank was out of his house and loose on the sidewalk. Luther stopped in front of the Trogdon spectacle. More than 14,000 lights draped over trees and shrubs and windows and porch columns. Up on the roof with Frosty was Santa and his reindeer. Rudolph, of course, with a bright, flashing nose, all perfectly outlined with white lights. The roof itself was lined with 2 rows of red and green, blinking alternatively. The chimney was flashing too, hundreds of blue lights pulsating at once and casting an eerie glow over old Frosty. Along the holly bushes next to the house, a squad of tin soldiers stood guard, each as tall as a human and wrapped with multicolored lights. In the center of the lawn was a handsome nativity scene, complete with real hay bales and a goat whose tail went up and down. Quite a show. Luther heard something, a ladder falling in the garage next to the Trogdons. The garage door was up, and through the shadows he saw Walt Shiel wrestling with yet another strand of lights. He walked over and caught Walt off guard. "Evening, Walt," he said pleasantly. "Well, if it isn't old Scrooge himself," Walt said with a forced smile. They shook hands, and each tried to think of something cutting and witty. Luther took a step back, looked up, and said, "How'd that photographer get up there?" "Which photographer?" "The one from the Gazette." "Oh, that one." "Yes, that one." He climbed up. "No kidding. Why'd you let him?" "I don't know. Said he wanted to get the whole street." Luther snorted and waved it off. "I'm a little surprised at you, Walt," he said, though he wasn't surprised at all. For 11 years they'd been cordial on the surface, neither wanting an outright feud. But Luther didn't like Walt for his snobbery and one-upsmanship, and Walt didn't care for Luther because he suspected for years that their salaries were almost equal. "And I'm a little surprised at you," Walt said, but neither neighbor was surprised at all. "I think you have a light out over there," Luther said, pointing to a shrub wrapped with 100 lights. "I'll get right on it. See you," Luther said, walking away. "Merry Christmas," Walt called after him. Yeah. Chapter 11. The Wiley and Beck office Christmas party would begin with a lunch catered by 2 feuding Greek brothers who made the best baklava in the city. The bar opened at precisely 11:45, 3 bars actually, and soon thereafter things got sloppy. Stanley Wiley would be the first to get smashed. He'd blame it on the loaded eggnog, and he'd stand on a box at the end of the conference table and deliver the same speech he'd given a week earlier at the Black Tie Christmas dinner. Then they'd present him with a gift, a shotgun or a new sand wedge or some other useless souvenir that he'd practically cry over, then quietly give to a client months later. There'd be other gifts, some speeches and gags, and a song or two as the booze flowed. 2 male strippers appeared one year, and to the beat of a howling boombox, disrobed down to their leopard thongs, while the men ran for cover and the secretary squealed with delight. Docs, Luther's secretary, had squealed the loudest and still had photos of the boys. In a memo, Stanley had banned future strippers. By 5, some of the most starched and staid accountants at Wiley & Beck would be groping or attempting to grope some of the homeliest secretaries. Getting plastered was accepted behavior. They'd hauled Stanley to his office and fill him with coffee before he could go home. The firm hired cars so no one would drive. All in all, it was a mess, but the partners loved it because it was a good drunk away from their wives, who had been properly entertained at the firm's fancy Christmas dinner and had never been invited to the office party. The secretaries loved it because they saw and heard things they could tuck away and use as blackmail for the rest of the year. Luther hated the Christmas party, even in a good year. He drank little and never got drunk, and every year he was embarrassed for his colleagues as they made fools of themselves. So he stayed in his office with his door locked and tended to last-minute details. Then, some music started down the hall just after 11 a.m. Luther found the right moment and disappeared. It was the 23rd of December. He wouldn't return until the 6th of January, and by then the office would be back to normal. Good riddance. He stepped into the travel agency to say goodbye to Biff, but she was already gone, off to a fabulous new resort in Mexico that offered a holiday package. He walked briskly to his car, quite proud that he was skipping the madness up on the 6th floor. He drove toward the mall for one last tanning session, one last look at the crush of idiots who'd waited until the last minute to buy whatever was left in the stores. The traffic was dense and slow, and when he finally arrived at the mall, a traffic cop was blocking the entrance. Parking lots were full, no more room, go away. Gladly, thought Luther. He met Nora for lunch at a crowded bakery in the district. They'd actually made a reservation, something unheard of for the rest of the year. He was late. She'd been crying. "It's Bev Shield," she said. "Went for a checkup yesterday. The cancer's back, for the 3rd time." Though Luther and Walt had never been close, their wives had managed to maintain good relations over the past couple of years. Truth was, for many years, no one on Hemlock had much to do with the Shields. They worked hard to have more, and their higher income had always been on display. "It spread to her lungs," Nora said, wiping her eyes. They ordered sparkling water. "And they suspect it's in her kidneys and liver." Luther winced as the horrific disease crept on. "That's awful," he said in a low voice. "This could be your last Christmas." "Did her doctor say that?" he asked, wary of amateur No, I did. They dwelt on the Shields for far too long, and when Luther had enough, he said, We leave in 48 hours. Cheers." They touched plastic glasses, and Nora managed a smile. Halfway through their salad, Luther asked, "Any regrets?" She shook her head no, swallowed, and said, "Oh, I've missed the tree at times, the decorations, the music, the memories, I guess, but not the traffic and shopping and the stress. It was a great idea, Luther. I'm a genius. Let's not get carried away. You think Blair will even think about Christmas?" "Not if she's lucky. Doubt it," he said with a mouthful. "She's working with a bunch of heathen savages who worship rivers and such. Why should they take a break for Christmas?" "That's a little harsh, Luther. Savages? Just kidding, dear. I'm sure they're gentle people. Not to worry." She said she never looks at a calendar. Now that's impressive. I've got 2 calendars in my office, and I still forget what day it is. Millie from the women's clinic barged in with a hug for Nora and a Merry Christmas for Luther, who would have otherwise been irritated, except that Millie was tall and lanky and very cute for a woman her age, early 50s. "You heard about Bev Shield?" Millie whispered, as if Luther had suddenly vanished. Now he was irritated. He prayed he'd never be stricken with some dreadful disease, not in this city. A volunteer woman would know about it before he did. "Give me a heart attack or a car wreck, something quick, something that cannot be whispered about while I linger." Millie finally left, and they finished their salads. Luther was famished as he paid the check and caught himself once again dreaming of the luxurious spreads of food in the Island Princess brochures. Nora had errands to run. Luther did not. He drove to Hemlock, parked in his driveway, a little relieved that there were no neighbors loitering near his house. In the Daily Mail there were 4 more anonymous Frosty Christmas cards, these postmarked in Rochester, Fort Worth, Green Bay, and St. Louis. Frohmeyer's bunch at the university traveled a lot, and Luther suspected that this was their little game. Frohmeyer was restless and creative enough to mastermind such a prank. 31 Frosty cards had now been received, two all the way from Vancouver. Luther was saving them, and when he returned from the Caribbean, he planned to stuff them in a large envelope and mail them anonymously, of course, to Vic Frohmeyer, 2 doors down. "They'll arrive with all of his credit card bills," Luther said to himself as he put the Frosty cards in a drawer with the others. He made a fire, settled under a quilt in his chair, and fell asleep. It was a rowdy night on Hemlock. Marauding bands of boisterous carolers took turns at the crank house. Often they were assisted by neighbors seized by the spirit of the moment. At one point, a chant of "We want Frosty" erupted behind a choir from the Lions Club. Handmade signs demanded free Frosty appeared. demanding free Frosty, appeared, the first hammered into the ground by none other than Spike Fromeyer. He and his little gang were up and down Hemlock on skateboards and bikes, yelling and reveling in their pre-Christmas Eve exuberance. An impromptu block party materialized. Trish Trogdon fixed hot cocoa for the kids while her husband Wes rigged up speakers in the driveway. Soon, Frosty the Snowman and Jingle Bells were wafting through the night, interrupted only when a real choir arrived to serenade the Cranks. Wes played a selection of favorites, but his favorite that night was Frosty. The Crank home remained dark and quiet, locked and secure. Nora was in the bedroom, gathering what she wanted to pack. Luther was in the basement, trying to read.